My name is Lisa Ross, though you may know me better as Paper Daisy Creations, and today I'm going to be showing you how to do Judy's Magic Cast-On. Sometimes abbreviated as JMCO, this is the perfect cast-on for working a toe-up sock. When you're working a toe-up sock, you don't want there to be any kind of seam right here. And this is a cast-on that's going to let it blend in seamlessly. There's no kind of ridge, nothing right there where you're starting. Now with this particular sock, the twisted ribbing begins soon afterwards, but there's no kind of inner seam right here at the toe. Let me show you on this other fingering weight sock. So you can see here on my Diamonds in the Light pattern how a Judy's Magic Cast-On looks in pattern. This is the toe-up equivalent of Kitchener stitch, so that you're ending with the yarn working perfectly in pattern. I'm going to show you how to do this on a DK weight sock because it's going to be easier to see. And this particular sock begins with some patterning at the toe. So we're going to work Judy's Magic Cast-On, we'll work a plain round of knitting, and then we will begin the patterning. Now, of course, if you are working from a different pattern, you need to follow the pattern for your sock using the numbers and instructions for your sock. But this is how you're going to work the cast-on. I find that Judy's Magic Cast-On is easiest using a long circular needle. So I have this needle in the gauge that I need. It's nice and long for working magic loop, but you can also do this cast-on using 2 circulars if that is your preference. It can also be done on double points, but I honestly have not been able to do it on double points. I have seen it done on double points, but I have not been able to do it. So I'm going to show you my favorite method using this long circular. So you'll need your yarn and you need 2 needles, and you want to be holding these needles so that they are very slightly angled apart from one another. If you have it too far apart, you're going to get a really loosely wrapped toe, and that's not what you want. You want to have a nice tight toe that matches the gauge of your knitting. So I'm going to hold these near the base with them just slightly apart from one another, creating like this V shape. And then I'm going to take my working yarn and I'm going to lay it over the far needle. So this is my far needle here, and this is my near or close needle. And that's how I'm going to refer to them for this video. So I've got my far needle and my close needle, and I'm actually going to pull these together a little bit closer once I get started. Now, when you're laying that yarn over, you're going to need enough yarn in order to create the number of stitches needed. For this particular sock, I'm going to have 8 stitches on this needle and 8 stitches on this needle. So I'm going to cast on a total of 16. And that yarn laying right there counts as my first stitch. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is hold those 2 yarns with my pinky. I have enough of a tail to work at least 8 stitches, plus a little extra for weaving in. And I've got my working yarn here. So I'm going to hold these with my pinky finger, and then I'm going to take my pincher fingers, my index and thumb, and I'm going to go into them like so. They're going to just hold that yarn apart, and I'm going to be moving the needles to loop the yarn in different ways around the needles. Okay, you want the tips to be close to one another. And now what I want to do, I've already got one on the far needle. You can see it right here. I need to get one onto the close needle. And so in order to do that, I'm going to swing my needles up, pointing north. And I want to scoop up this yarn with my bottom needle, with my close needle. And it's going to be like that. So let me show you that again. I've got my yarn around the far needle. I'm going to swing both needles up. They're going to pivot together like this throughout the entire cast on. And I'm going to scoop up the yarn with just the close needle. Do not go over both. You want to go just over the close needle. And so I'm doing it between these two needles like this. It's got to go up and into the middle. So let me show you that one more time. We're going to swing the needles up. The yarn is going to go over the close needle, and so I'm going to kind of swing it up as I swing the needles down. And now I have one stitch over each of the needles. All right, now I need to put a stitch on the far needle. So to do that, I'm going to swing the needles down, and I'm going to scoop this yarn. It starts out between the two needles and goes up and over the far needle. All right, and this is how I'm going to continue to make my stitches. So I swing the needles up, and the yarn goes up between the two needles, up and over that bottom, up and over the close needle. I'm going to swing down. The yarn starts between the two needles and goes up and over the far needle. So you can see I've got a very tiny gap here, and I've got my stitches appearing on the needles. So swing the needles up, and you're going to go up and over the close needle, bringing the yarn down in between the two. Swing the needles down. The yarn starts out between the two needles and goes up and over. Now I have 7 stitches. I'm going to put on 8, 9, 10, there's 5 on each, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. So I have 8 stitches on each needle. You can double check. Make sure that you have a nice tight line of stitches. You do not want this to become too loose. If you can see gaps in here, then it's too loose. You don't want to have any gapping there. That's going to be your toe. If you're working a sock, you can also use Judy's Magic Cast On for other things, but socks are the things I use it the most for. All right, and I ended with this tail. So all I need to do with the tail is pass it over the working yarn, because I'm going to begin stitching along that needle, and that's just going to lock it in place when I use my working yarn. So I took that yarn, my tail, you can see it created the last stitch on my close needle. I'm going to just cross it over the working yarn, and now I'm ready to knit these stitches. So the way that I knit them is magic loop style. I'm going to pull out this was the far needle, and I'm going to be knitting these stitches with the working yarn. Excuse me, knitting these stitches with the working yarn. And again, make sure that your tail looped over, or actually not looped, just lays over the working yarn. All right, and I'm going to knit those stitches across. Okay, now I'm going to show you one little tip for something I like to do. I like to knit the first 2 stitches, and then I pick up my tail, and I'm going to knit 3 or 4 stitches with the tail and the working yarn held together. And the reason I do that is it's going to weave in that end for me. So I'm just going to work 1, 2, 3, and I'll go ahead and do one more. I like to have it really secure. All right, and I'm going to show you another little trick that we're going to use that tail for in just a minute. So that tail is securely woven in. It also gives a little bit of reinforcement on those stitches at the toe. I'm going to knit across. Oh. All right, so I've knit across what had been the close needle. And now I'm going to adjust my needles as I do for magic loop. So I'm going to put the stitches that have not been worked, that are ready to be worked, I'm going to put those on the other needle and pull this one out. Okay, so I'm on the far side. These stitches have not yet been worked. So I'm going to knit across those. And at the end of this, I will have knit 1 round. And anytime I write my Judy's Magic Cast On patterns, I always start with knitting 1 round. And that allows you then to check your cast on, make sure it looks great, and to work the various increases that might come up as you are knitting your sock. All right, so you can see it's nice and tight. There are no gaps there. It's going to be a perfect toe, and I'm ready to begin the next side. Now, at this point, if you are working a stockinette toe, you'll be following your pattern. One of the ways I like to work stockinette toes is to work a knit front and back on that second stitch, which is why we waited until the 3rd stitch to pick up. It also makes it easier for the M1L increase, which we're going to begin right now. Okay, so before we begin our patterning, this is what I like to do. I take my tail, you can see it was worked with these stitches, and I just put it between these 2 needles, and I'm going to keep it there. And the reason I do that is that that tail is going to remind me that that is the beginning of my round. Now you could put a marker here. You could definitely do that. This is just the way that I like to do it with what I've got, and no need for an extra marker. All right, so I'm beginning the patterning. Again, if you're not doing this pattern, you can follow your instructions. But for this design, I'm going to knit 1. And always when doing the first stitch on a magic loop needle, make sure you pull it nice and snug. This one has an M1L. And now I'm going to be working knit through the back loop, purl 1, and since I wove in since I worked those 2 yarns together, I need to work them as if they are a single stitch. So make sure that you do that. They have to be worked as a single stitch because those are not increased stitches. Okay. And I'm working that purl 1, knit through the back loop to the last stitch. Ends with a purl 1. And now I'm going to do an M1R. And it is a little tight and a little fiddly once you get started. All right, and then I knit my last stitch, and that is my first line of patterning for the sock. I'll go ahead and show you the second side of the sock. So this one is just worked, this is the sole of the sock, so for this design it's worked in stockinette. So I'm going to knit 1, remember to pull that nice and tight when working magic loop. You're going to work your M1L, knit across, and knitting to the very last stitch where I will then work M1R. So here's my M1R. Oop. And complete. Okay. Oh, and it looks like I did not keep my yarn here. So this yarn, which was supposed to indicate my beginning of the round, seems to have moved out of the way when I was knitting. And so I'm going to put it back here as I work my way across. And all that is, it's just marking my round. Again, you could use a removable stitch marker. That's just the way to work your Judy's Magic Cast On. For this particular design, it's going to look like this. You have your cast on right here, and then you have your beautiful ribbed toe working its way up into a wonderfully patterned, super thick DK weight sock that is just perfect for wintertime. Thank you so much for joining me. I hope you'll check out my patterns. You can find them on Ravelry.com and on PaperDaisyCreations.com. And I wish you all very happy knitting.